Hi, I'm Zachary Cote, the Executive Director of Thinking Nation, a nonprofit with a platform designed to shift the paradigm of history education. Often, when I ask people what history is, I hear a very simple answer. It's the past. In order to shift the paradigm of history education, we need to understand history a little bit differently. Rather than seeing history as merely the past, we need to see history as the study of the past. What this means for history teachers is that when we try to instill history into our students, we're not simply trying to create walking encyclopedias who can recall information about the past at any notice. Instead, we want to create critical thinking citizens who have the skills necessary to understand the past, to analyze the past, and make meaning of the past for their present. We believe that the skills to do this are difficult, but the way we can teach them can be targeted and simple, and that's what Thinking Nation sets out to do. Our purpose for schools is twofold. First, and most importantly, we believe in empowering students to analyze information effectively, think historically, and write persuasively. We think that these are the skills needed to preserve our democracy and build a democratic future. Second, and what really makes this important for us as a tech platform, is that we believe that when data drives instruction, schools can best meet the needs of their students. This is why we developed a platform and grading services that provide teachers, schools, and districts with the data they need to push learning forward, prepare students for high-stakes exams, and prepare them for life outside of the classroom. When we created Thinking Nation, we thought it was really important to emphasize that historical thinking is not just a skill to happen within the history classroom, but they are much broader skills that can empower students, promote equity in our classrooms, and cultivate citizens. We've broken up our targeted approach to teaching historical thinking into 3 stages of student practice. First, we teach students the simple task of analyzing documents and artifacts of the past. Students are constantly receiving information. But unlike historians, they haven't been trained to ask key questions about the sources they read, like what context is around the source, who's the author of this source, and what's their perspective, or whose voice is not being seen in this source. When students learn to ask good questions about the things that they read and the artifacts they interact with, they're better prepared to make evidence-based decisions, both in and out of the classroom. Our second stage of student practice are our formative assessments. With our formative assessments, we want to give teachers targeted feedback on how students are doing in their ability to think historically. And then lastly are our summative assessments, our document-based questions, or DBQs, where students are given a prompt about a historical topic, several documents from that time period, or secondary sources about that topic, and then they're asked to make meaning of that prompt and make meaning of the documents, to create their own judgments about the past. And in this, we hope to teach students that history is not stagnant, and it's not black and white, but it's a contested discipline where evidence informs our reasoning. Today, we're going to dive into our formative assessments and our DBQs, which are primarily housed on our platform. Our formative assessments are meant to give teachers quick but key insights in how students are thinking historically. Rather than these assessments assessing what students know, they assess the skills of the historian. How can students navigate the past? They're bite-sized assessments that take teachers only 15 to 30 minutes to implement. And after they're submitted, both the student and the teachers can get immediate feedback on the student's ability to think historically. Today, we're going to look on our platform at a particular formative assessment on how enslaved people resisted their enslavement. So I'm logged in as a student right now on the Thinking Nation platform. You can see that the student was assigned one formative assessment on slave resistance. When the student opens the formative assessment, the first page is just the introduction page. It introduces the skill that's being assessed, in this case contextualization and sourcing, a quick definition of the skill, and then an outline of how the assessment will be scored. Like most of our formative assessments, this one is built around a primary source. In this case, the primary source is an advertisement offering a reward for the capture of runaway slaves from New Orleans in 1857. Students will read these 2 advertisements and then are asked questions about how they're navigating the text. The first question asks students, what information do you know about this source? And this forces students to look at this source box that we so often skip when we're just reading for information, and really try to understand the author, if there is one, the time and the place of a document being written. And this allows students to better understand the historical context of whatever source they're looking at. Then they're asked a weighted multiple choice question. Weighted multiple choice simply means that there is one most correct answer, or two, depending on the formative assessment, and then it goes down from there. So then there's a next best answer, and a completely incorrect answer. And this allows both the teacher and the student to not just see what the student did wrong, but to understand on a continuum where they are in the historical thinking process. So in this case, the question asks which two questions would best help to better understand the purpose of this document. So then the student has to think historically. Well, what information do I need to know to better understand what I'm reading? Now you'll note that students aren't asked to know any information. This is merely assessing how they navigate a text, because it's a really important skill, not just for the history classroom, but outside of the history classroom as they navigate the information in the world around them. And this is what we mean by a paradigm shift in history education, that we're flipping the script, and it's not just assessing what students know, but how they navigate the information they encounter. So students would select two questions, and then the question number 3 asks them to justify their answer. So why are these two questions so helpful to understanding the purpose of this document? And then they would type their answer in the box below. Once they're done with that, they can save and submit to their teacher, and click the Submit to Teacher button. They'll be asked, are they sure? And they submit. And then on the home page, they can view the formative assessment, and they can see right away how they did, at least on the multiple choice section. So as I can see, they only got one right. So my guesses weren't good for this one. So there were two questions that were worth 2 points, one that was worth 1 point and one that was worth 0. So in this case, the student selected one of the 1 point questions and then the 0 point question. Then you'll note that the first question says not graded and the third question says not graded. And this is because teachers have the ability through their platform to give specific grades to the short answer questions. So they can get immediate feedback on the quick information of the weighted multiple choice, but are still able to give specific feedback to their students with the short answer questions. The next part of our platform we're going to look at are DBQs. And these can take anywhere between 3 and 7 days for a classroom. So sometimes teachers like to use our DBQs as teaching tools to take students through the content of their unit. In other cases, teachers assign these as summative assessments, whether it be a unit test, a midterm, or a final. So back on the student homepage, they'll see they have a DBQ assigned to them, just like they did with the formative assessment. And once the DBQ opens, they're presented with a pretty long digital packet to work through. So the first page, they read the prompt and write it in their own words. The second page, they'll look at some vocabulary that will be helpful, and their job is to try to match the vocabulary with its correct definition. Then they have some time to brainstorm information they already know about the topic. They read a short excerpt on how this topic is relevant today, and then they get to the meat of the content, and they read this essay entitled What is the Context? And this gives them the historical context they need to be successful on the DBQ. Then they're introduced to the documents. So this is a high school DBQ that has 7 documents. At Thinking Nation, we try to make sure that there's a variety of document types. So document A in this case is a poem. Document B is that newspaper advertisement that we saw in the formative assessment. We see that document F is a map of routes of the Underground Railroad. And then document G is an excerpt from Frederick Douglass's first narrative. So for each document, students are given 2 text-based questions where they can answer the question for the teachers to look at their answers. And then once they work through this packet, their job is to outline. So the last page of the packet is a really simple outline for students to structure their essays, their introduction paragraph, thesis statement, the topics of their body paragraphs, and then their conclusion. And once they fill this out, they'll click the essay button, which will open up the essay pop-out. And if they like to type their essay while they look at the documents, they can do that, or they can expand the essay and just make the page a word processing document. What we've looked at so far really fulfills our first purpose for schools, and that's to empower students to analyze information effectively, think historically, and write persuasively. The next thing we're going to look at fulfills our second purpose for schools, and that's giving teachers, schools, and districts the data they need to drive learning forward. So the process works like the screenshots here show. A student would submit an essay, and then our graders, who are also teachers, grade the essay. And then once graders submit that grade, the teacher can see the grade and release that grade to the students. But what teachers can also see and download is a data report that shows trends in that particular classroom, as well as how individual students did in individual categories. So we're going to look at what that looks like for a teacher. So this teacher account has a DBQ on the 14th amendment here. This is a test account, so we just have a few scores, but we can click View Report. And then the teacher can instantly see the class average versus the school average. They can see how students did in each category. And then they can see how individual students did in individual categories. So why is this data important? First, like I said, the data can be used as focus points for professional learning communities or department meetings when teachers come together to analyze student work to better understand student needs and how they can get students to where they need to be. The data can also be used for interdisciplinary collaboration because we make sure to align our rubrics to the same writing skills that are being asked of students in their English and science classes. Some of our school and district partners use the data from our DBQs as benchmarks, whether it be for a promotion goal or a midterm for the social studies department. The data helps individual teachers by providing targeted feedback for individual student error analysis. Our graders always give personalized feedback to the student essays that they grade, so that way students can look closely at the work they submitted after it was submitted and make changes to create better essays in the future. This data has helped many of our partners for observation and inquiry cycles, whether it be for teacher induction or teacher coaching across the district. Lastly, teachers can use this data to look at the different subgroup populations in their classes, so that way they can create targeted reteach and extension lessons. So what does this mean for your school? How can Thinking Nation help? First, by having an online platform that can be both administered through our platform or through PDF form. This allows teachers to implement assignments whether or not students are in the classroom, independent study, or quarantining. Our standards aligned rubrics make sure that teachers teach to the standards that high stakes exams require of them. By having a team of teacher graders look through the student essays, as well as giving teachers data on the formative assessments that they grade themselves, teachers have the tools they need to drive learning forward. And lastly, by allowing teachers to give these high stakes performance tasks in the form of DBQs without having to spend their entire weekends grading, that gives teachers the time they need to focus on teaching and to make sure that the student needs are met. Quickly, I want to talk about our pricing. As a nonprofit, we have an equity-based pricing model, and this gives us the ability to work with schools no matter the context. Please reach out to us. We'd love to work with you and really work together to shift the paradigm of history education and empower students to analyze effectively, think historically, and write persuasively. Thanks.